Good afternoon, all. We begin the fourth book of our Torah, of our Chameshet Chomshei Torah, this Shabbat with Parshat BaMidbar. We read it right before Shavuot, which comes a few days later. And I have entitled this particular discussion, The Beauty and Opportunity of Deserts. I'm going to begin with words of wisdom from someone outside of the Jewish community. A woman named Latoya writes on the website God Applied on WordPress as follows. Yesterday morning, I took a lovely hike with my family. We like to try new experiences, so this summer we landed in Arizona, the desert. So what better activity for our first full day than a morning hike through the Sonoran Desert? We hear a lot about the desert, that dry, desolate place with little water, where nothing thrives. You hear a lot of similarities drawn between the desert and challenges in life. But as we hiked, there was so much beauty, even in the dusty desert. The desert is just a different type of environment, where we sometimes have to learn to do things differently or acclimate to the different environment. But a desert is not a barren wasteland. I was amazed by the beautiful yellow flowers starting to bud and bloom amidst this dry, almost gray, round, prickly cactus. My sons were amazed at the beautiful green trees that were green from the base up through every branch and thin leaves. Not green from mold either, but from life. The trees seem to have adapted to the environment and learned to thrive where they are. Talk about blooming where you are planted. So we were in New York this week for the Eshel Gala, yay Eshel. And I said to my husband as we were walking through a very small part of Manhattan where we were staying, okay, there's too many tall buildings here. There's no grass. There's no peaceful pause from buildings and concrete and all that. And then we came back to bucolic Elkins Park, and I went, And my son, our son, Brian Victor, who lives in Arizona, in Flagstaff, often will take walks and hikes through the parks, through the hiking trails, go to Sedona, and appreciate the nature the desert has to offer. In our Parsha, we read extensive details regarding what all good camp counselors do at the beginning of a journey as they begin to go through the desert. They take attendance, they set the rules of encampment and organization of the group. We have numbers of people, the organization of the Shvatim, of the tribes, how the different tribes are to be positioned, where their encampments will be, details regarding the army to protect the encampment, roles of the various groupings, and so on. All seem set to go on a journey in which one hopes the group will find the beauty and opportunity of growth and maturation as a group that potentially lies ahead of them in the desert. As we begin our fourth book of the Chumash, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Zichrono L'Shalom, reminds us of the following. The fourth book of the Bible, of the Torah, is known in English as the Book of Numbers, because it begins with a command to count the Israelites, to take a census to establish their numbers. However, in Hebrew, it is known by the first word of its first sentence, the first key word of our reading, BaMidbar, in the Midbar, in the wilderness. This is always read on the Shabbat before Shavuot, the festival of the giving of our Torah. Is there any significance to these facts? Are they related? Is there a connection between wilderness, revelation, and numbers? And is there a reason that the Jewish tradition preferred to call the book wilderness rather than numbers? The Hebrew word midbar, wilderness, has the same root as davar, diber, speak, word, thing. It has the same letters as midaber, speaking. It is in the wilderness that the Israelites are in the midbar, and they hear the midaber. They hear God speaking. They hear the words of God in the midbar without other distractions. My distractions were the concrete. In the midbar, you have this peaceful, calm place, and God is speaking. Fundamental to Judaism, continues Rabbi Sachs, is the belief that God cannot be seen. For every ancient faith but one, the gods were present in the phenomena of nature: the sun, the stars, the sky, the sea. They were visible. They were things that were seen. In Israel, for the B'nai Yisrael, there was a revolutionary idea that reached expression. God is beyond nature. I would add that in this desert, in this wilderness, we are reminded of the very communication channel we do use with God as well as with others, namely our words, dvarim. If we begin our new reality and find our newly fashioned selves through the words that we use to communicate, then perhaps that is where we find the beauty and opportunity of our future, birthed here, BaMidbar, in the desert, in the wilderness. The setup is here, with all details precisely indicated. For example, notice the organizational detail in the following verses, similar to those found throughout our Parsha. I begin with verse 17. Moshe and Aaron takes these men who were indicated by their names, and they assembled the entire congregation on the first day of the second month, and they declared their pedigrees. They said, these are our families, according to the fathers' houses, according to the number of names, a head count of every male from 20 years on and upward, to help protect the collective. As God commanded Moshe, so Moshe counted, Vayafkidem, all of the Israelites in the Midbar, in Midbar Sinai. Was this preparation enough? Were the camp counselors doing their due diligence to ensure a comfortable and meaningful experience of rebirth and aspirations? Perhaps not. Aviva Zornberg teaches us, although the Israelite wilderness experience begins in Exodus and concludes in Devarim, the book of BaMidbar claims the interior of this world of wilderness as its particular territory. It evokes not only geographical terrain, but also an inner landscape, an inscape, as it were, a world of imaginative being. The desert here, by the way, is not desolate by any stretch of the imagination, but think of the painter, the artist, looking at a blank canvas, imagining what they can do, and then creating something really amazing. Between Egypt and the Holy Land, the wilderness intervenes. As the Torah tells the story, this was meant to form a brief episode in the history of the Israelites, a passage between leaving Egypt, Yetziat Mitzrayim, and entering the land. But the brief interlude suddenly and tragically swells to healthy proportions. What is the nature of this interim space so terribly extended? Let us consider a group of sources and commentaries that bring us back not to the organizational details, but rather the hopes, beauty, and opportunity of deserts as reflected in our experiences, our words, our things, all conveyed by BaMidbar. Like those that many people retreat to today in our busy, crazy, all too filled with detailed lives. In our Haftarah, we will read as follows. Therefore, and these are the words of Hosea, I will allure her, I will bring her, Lachein hinei anochi mipater, and I will bring her into the wilderness, v'aliktiha hamidbar, v'dibarti aliba, and in the wilderness I will speak to her heart. This makes sense in terms of retreats that people go on today, and those of us who just need the quiet of walking in a peaceful environment to balance our lives, relating to and recapturing our inner hearts without the distractions that can eclipse our inner beings in our everyday lives. From the Midrash Tanchuma, as reported by Rashi, we learn, Rabbi Tanhuma interpreted, "This is like a king whose son was sick, so he took him to a distant place to heal him. On their way back, his father began to enumerate all the separate stages of the journey. He told him, 'You were ill. Here we slept. Here we caught cold. Here you had a headache,' and so on. And now you rest and you reboot. A new beginning." Ramban on BaMidbar, chapter 1, verse 1 says, "This book is made up entirely of commandments that were relevant specifically to the Israelites' situation while they were traveling through the wilderness, and of the miracles that were performed for them there, to recount all of the marvelous deeds of the Lord who dealt so wondrously with them." It further tells how God began to put their enemies in power and commands how the land is to be appropriated amongst them. We will also note that in spite of this incredibly detailed and structured setup, things will not go as planned or hoped, as future Parshiot will show. Thus, there may be accommodations and another reminder that even a good relaxing stroll in the desert, albeit that's not what's going on here, may or may not achieve its purpose. In her book, Bewilderments, Reflections on the Book of BaMidbar, Aviva Zornberg teaches, "The surface of the wilderness proves to hold vertical menace. Into this wilderness your carcasses shall fall," the Torah intones repeatedly. This is not simply a walking service for the traveling people, but a quicksand ready to consume human bodies. It is an environment that is inimical to human life. The landscape does not yield to human demands. It may frustrate the need for food and drink, but also the basic demand for direction, for markings to indicate a human mapping of blank space. No human steps have trod this sand. It stares back at the traveler indifferently. Pathless, bewildering to the human imagination. A kind of horror besets the mind. Already traumatized by their Egyptian past, the Israelites, one by one, must be swallowed into this senseless space. And I think what Zornberg is doing here is giving us yet another psychological insight, as she always goes behind and underneath the words, to why they're scared, why fear perpetuates, why it's so rampant. Later when we see the story of the scouts, for example, how do we explain the chaos? How do we explain the murmurings of the people? And that's what how can this be? How can human existence so filled with so much detail survive in this desert? That is what she says is bewildering to the human imagination. She continues, "The experience of Midbar extends to the edges of life. It suddenly becomes a total experience. The people will never know any other reality. This davar, this thing, this essence of their experience is indeed BaMidbar, in the desert. But precisely there lies the central enigma of the narrative. Till the second census in chapter 26, the reader does not clearly understand that 38 years have passed with their full harvest of death. Only when the text clearly states that in this census there are no survivors from the earlier census at the beginning of the book will we realize, without our noticing, that an entire generation has slipped into the sands of the Midbar. The challenge, I think, is for us to find the beauty and the opportunity, as well as recognize the hardships. It's a simple, but often difficult to attain aspect of life. Take note of the numbers that are presented in this Parsha and compare it to what we learned in the beginning of Sefer Shemot. How many came with Yosef, and what happens? We read in Shemot in the beginning, "Now those who descended from Yaakov were 70 souls, and Yosef, who was in Egypt, Yosef dies, as well as the brothers in his generation. We pull that number to about 70. And then what do we read? B'nai Yisrael paru v'yishratzu v'yirba'u v'ya'atzmu b'ma'od ma'od v'timaleha ha'artzotam. And the children of Israel were fruitful. They multiplied. They swarmed around. The word sheretz is used. Sheretz is like an unclean thing, like a worm or something. But they swarmed around. They increased. They became very strong, and the land became filled with them. And now look at these numbers. The numbers here in our Parsha are exponentially voluminous. While marveling at this growth, the organizational elements and the ongoing place of gratitude to God is included there as well, as exemplified by the dedication of the firstborn sons cited here. In chapter 3, verse 11 through 13, and then 21 through 22, we read, "And God said to Moshe, saying, As for me, I will take the Levites from the B'nai Yisrael. I will take them in place of all firstborns amongst the children of Israel who have opened the womb," in other words, the dedication of the firstborn to God, "and the Levites shall be mine. All firstborn are mine, since the day I smote all the firstborns of Egypt. I will betroth you to me forever, and I will betroth you to me with righteousness, with justice, with loving kindness, with mercy, with faith, and you shall know the Lord." So we see two important ideas here. One idea is that, number one, that the Levites will be the leadership, and number two, the firstborn are belonging to God, and we know that about Pidyon ha-bikorim, Pidyon ha-ben, for firstborn sons. Remember the notion that I shared at the beginning of the Torah reading cycle, that our haftarot are matched for themes to help either emphasize the reading of our Torah or in times when such readings were prohibited to remind our own legions of the content? Well, here we are. Let's continue with our haftarah reading from the second chapter of Hosea. Remember him? The prophet whose entire life, including his marriage to his wife Gomer and their children, were object lessons of love for those who may go astray. Take note of the words, the things, the happenings, the wilderness of the experience. In Hosea, "I will give her the vineyards. I will give her what she needs. She will dwell there as in the days of her youth, in the days of her ascent from the land of Egypt," evoking Yetziat Mitzrayim and the B'nai Yisrael. "And it will come to pass on that day, says God, that you will call me your Ish, your person. I will remove the names of all the idols from her mouth, from Israel's mouth." And again, Hosea and Gomer's experience is a prototype, if you will, for the Israel God experience. And we know that every marriage evokes that kind of imagery. We use it in our wedding ceremonies as well. "I will make a covenant for them on that day. V'charati lahem brit b'yom hahu. With the beasts of the field, the fowl of the sky, the creeping things, the bow, I will break off the earth and I will let them lie down safely." So it's the notion that God will keep us, God will make a covenant. And remember, there's two meanings of this word covenant. Karet, lekaret, it means both to separate and join you to me, and also to cut off. And there are many words like that. The word kosher, we think of all the time, kosher, we think of food as permitted. But when you read the various legal codes, such as Mishnah Torah, lahachshir means to be made available, or to be appropriate, or to be readied, to be either permitted or not permitted. So anything that is joined to one thing, if you think of it that way, is also separated from other things. And at this point, we evoke what I read earlier. "I will betroth you to me forever." So this covenant is to join, and you will know God. Only when the shackles of the past were thrown off could new beginnings commence. That was the spiritual desert that accompanied the physical desert of BaMidbar. BaMidbar As a desert may be bereft of the noise, any of us who have gone for those walks in quiet places, we know that. But then we take pictures of all the pretty flowers, or we find the peace within ourselves. And we need to see that's understanding both the opportunity and the beauty of the Midbar. Not to feel that you are lost, but to feel you have an opportunity to go further. The desert presents a potentially cleansing and rebirth opportunity. And the question is, given all the organizational details that are provided to facilitate this rebirth, will the B'nai Yisrael avail themselves of the experience, cleansing themselves from the memory of the abuses and the power structure of Mitzrayim, and then welcome rebirth as a different type of nation? They will not forget their experiences from the past, but hopefully they will glean really important and meaningful lessons from it. Feel the blessings of their incredibly increased numbers and follow Ribbon Shalom, holding onto faith and the pain as well as the instruction of learned lessons as they forge a new type of future. This is the hope. It always is. And it continues to be so for a very fractured world. As we know, next week is Shavuot. It's Wednesday and Thursday, so I will be recording this on Tuesday at some point. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom and a meaningful and wonderful Shavuot. And may it be an opportunity to remind us of the receiving of Torah, Zeman Matan Toratenu, the rebirth of ourselves in doing that yearly reactivation of it. May we do so with kindness and care and empathy, as we see in Sefer Ruth, which we will read. And may we all be blessed to find peace and comfort and new opportunities in our world. Shabbat Shalom to all.